Why atheism over agnosticism? Everybody's agnostic. Theists don't admit that, and that kind of annoys me. So for the double standard, I generally don't use the word agnostic. I use atheist, and I used agnostic atheist. My proper position is agnostic atheist. I don't believe in a God. I don't have enough information to know that there is no God. Nobody does. And frankly, nobody could. I think that it is extremely unlikely there are any deities or supernatural things of any sort. So I am not, I don't use the word agnosticism because I don't want to imply that, the middle position of maybe it's possible, maybe it's not possible. I am firmly in the very low non-belief category. Atheism is, it's a bit of a statement too, that it says that the God belief is so unlikely if you look at it objectively and with all the information we have these days, in modern days, that is the most likely to be true. And when I'm pissed, when I'm in an angry mood, yeah, I will say that there is no God. And if someone challenges me in an argument, then yeah, I will also back off and talk about the absolutes. And yeah, I can't be absolute. But then I will ask the other side to acknowledge that they can't be absolute either. Now, when they don't say that, that's when it gets interesting. Because if I admit that on a disbelief side we can't know for sure, but they will not admit on the theist side that they don't know for sure either. Just independent of the level of our belief or disbelief, then the first question that comes to my mind is why can't they admit it? The cruel answer that comes to mind is they lost the ability to think. And I know that's not true. So are they just being stubborn? Do they not want to admit that they're even considering having any doubt or recognize any doubt or say it out loud because maybe God will hear them or something and that sort of thing? No one's ever admitted to that. So I usually get these 100% standing positions where people will say, no, I 100% believe. And that to me, I cannot believe that. Having studied belief for a period of time now, that does not comport with intellectual normality and intellectual honesty. How long have I been like this? Let's see. I put this shirt on this morning, so I've been this way about 12 hours. Yeah. Since it's been a slow transition. I grew up Catholic. I stopped going when I was in late teens, and because the stories started to just look like stories in the sermons, I put it aside, came back to it slowly, but it never made sense. And eventually I read the Bible straight through and figured I'd educate myself properly on it. And it seemed quite apparent from reading the book that, I'm not popping peas here. It seemed to be quite apparent from reading the book that was a book about people who believed, not about deities. So it's been about 20 some years. And I've been, I guess activist you'd call it, for probably 12, 15 of those. Can I join, please? I think you can. Let's find out. Who have we got back here? I'm going to send out, I didn't see that person. Let me look at that once again. Harris has, I'm going to do this for a little bit. So give me a couple minutes, and then I'll get to you all. You laughed. You tried not to, but you did. Not sure if that's directed at me or not. So how long have you been like this?
I've always been curious, like, how do we interact with Calvinism?
Calvinism specifically?
Yeah, because I've run into a few Calvinists on TikTok, and I can understand that it's nonsensical. I can understand that it doesn't make sense through my worldview, but I grew up evangelical Christian, so the faith that I originally grew up in, I've since become an apostate for a long time, but that was never a part of our faith or anything that I grew up around. So it was very new for me to learn about the Calvinist belief of there is absolutely no free will. And obviously through atheism, we are able to like kind of deconstruct just the concept of free will as it is, but they take it a step further. And I don't really know how to interact with it to try to, have a discussion about it. Cause it feels like it's very solidified in their belief, and that it almost feels like it's impossible to pull any strings out of it. Try to pull that thread that unravels the sweater. It doesn't seem like it's possible. So I was curious if you had any experience with it.
Not really. I mean, I'm not that familiar with different denominations, what each one does. To me, that they all seem the same in the sense that if you're following the Bible, you're a Christian, and that's kind of much as I need. So, but tell me about this free will. So they believe that there is no free will, or free will comes from God, or
so they believe that there is no free will whatsoever, that everything is predetermined, and that there are people that exist that are essentially the way it was described to me was that there are clay idols that exist, that their entire purpose on this earth is to essentially just burn. It's the whole purpose of their existence is to be an antithetical. Yeah, like when someone is created, there are people who are created that will go to heaven, and there are people who are created who are predestined to never get into heaven, and that is predetermined from your creation. Because there's the whole thing about God knows you before you're born and what you will do. There's and that's something that even just regular Christianity believes, but Calvinists legitimately think that no, there are some people who just will never, and they're literally created as clay idols to stoke God's wrath, to continue the cycle of hell and heaven and all this stuff. It's a wild viewpoint, and it's really hard to discuss with because normally when you would be having this kind of a discussion with a regular Christian, we would bring up oh well, if God knows us before we were born, yada, 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 then he knows the path that we will take. Therefore, how do we have free will? And they're saying, yeah, you don't have free will. And that means God is good. So I don't know how to interact with that.
I got to tell you, that explains right there why Calvinism isn't as popular as some other ones.
Yeah.
I mean, and it also reminds me of Jehovah's Witnesses, where it's the 144,000 are going to go to heaven, or the first highest level of heaven, but that's been filled already years ago. So now they had to add a second tier, kind of like Scientology adds tiers. Gosh, I mean, I can talk about free will. It's just there seems to be some real authoritarian, so let's say, origin to that kind of a structure, to build that kind of a structure.
Right. So it feels very might makes right.
Well, no, authoritarian into the leaders are the ones who are correct, and this is their rationale for it. So listen to the leaders kind of thing, and you have no choice, and they put like a deity behind it to justify that. But I'm speculating. So all I can really do is respond on the free will thing. Because it does appear, at least from the science side, that the consensus is going more toward that we don't have free will from a physics perspective, that everything is sort of intermingled physics effects, right? Chemistry effects and environmental effects like temperature. So
right.
That when we decide to do something, we are not aware of all the variables that go into that decision. So there seems to be some sort of I don't know if it's determinism, because quantum effects might actually be the origin to this. But as far as I'm concerned, it's an interesting philosophical topic. Perhaps there's more evidential stuff in science, but it doesn't matter because we're not aware of the variables. Right. So we might as well act as if we have free will. So on that kind of basis, the Calvinism, the way you describe it, I personally would just kind of dismiss it because it just sounds like a fanciful story. But what kind of difficulty are you having with them? I mean, what do they come back at? If you say we have free will because we're not aware of what causes us to do things or what makes us make decisions, but we seem to be able to choose between a chocolate chip and an oatmeal cookie at some sort of simple base level, what do they come back with? Well,
like I said, it usually is just because the way that I'll discuss the concept of free will, at least biblically, is that I usually try to, Maggie, stop it. I try to go back to Genesis, the creation story, and the Garden of Eden. I know I don't have to explain this to you, but just to baseline it, it's the concept of like Eve was created without the concept of good and evil, because to know the concept of good and evil, to know good and evil was to be of God. That's why God created yada yada yada. So my thought process on it is that Eve had no possible way of making an informed decision or have free will in the subject, because she had no concept of, was the serpent evil, was temptation evil, was disobeying God evil. She had no way of being able to suss out if something was good or bad, because she had no concept of it. And therefore, I don't see how, from a Christian perspective, you can then say that we have free will. And the Calvinist perspective on that would be that, yes, God predestined and predetermined that Eve would betray him.
Well, that's an assertion. And to be honest, I don't spend time. I've decided not to spend time trying to figure out an interpretive logic of a book that was written by people. It's just kind of that simple. So I think when people these days try to figure the Bible out in that sense, recognize that those arguments have been had since 100 years after Jesus or so, when the earliest biblical passages were written and debated, and the Trinity and all this stuff is debated and debated and debated for thousands and thousands of years. It's an inconsistent book. If you don't buy anything supernatural, there's no reason to go to it as a source of logic, which is to say that if there are oddities and plot holes, that kind of a thing, inconsistencies, or things that don't make logical sense, like omniscience, that stop looking at that in that location for an answer. Let them play that game if that's what they want to do, if it's important to them.
Yeah,
but there may not be an answer in a sense to be had there, to be found.
Yeah, I guess because I came from a religious background, and I know a lot of atheists do as well, I feel like I have somewhat of a unique position to be able to try to engage with those topics and try to deconstruct it the same way that I did, and try to walk them through, why do I have this thought process on this, and work through it. And I mean, ultimately, we're trying to apply epistemology to ontology, so it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, because we're trying to apply logic to metaphysics, and metaphysics as a whole it exists outside.
Well, metaphysics is a set of questions, right? Metaphysics is basically questions that we can't ask other ways, right? It doesn't match with the natural world, otherwise we'd be asking scientific questions. So I don't see that there's any answers in metaphysics. To say that it's another place, a transcendent place, or put some sort of label like that on it, I don't see that that's justified. Because what you do in the end, I think, is look for assumptions underlying assumptions in any statement. If someone gives you a statement like God is the source of logic, ask them to justify that. And if you find holes in that, then it's wrong, or go to somebody else who you think might be better at that kind of analysis and see how they've approached the question. So it's important, I think, to do what you're doing, or at least for some of us to do what you're doing. I don't do it because I don't know the Bible that well. I wasn't a Bible studier. I mean, I've read it, but I haven't studied it in detail. But that also means that I won't really step into their world and spin around and spend my time in there.
Ultimately, it might just be a pointless endeavor. I agree. It definitely could be. I guess in the way of like just trying to have a conversation about it, I'm trying to at least bridge that gap some way to try to pull them in the other direction. And I've had some people who have come a little further. Maybe I haven't deconstructed anybody, but I've definitely had some people who have been open to, well, you know what, that doesn't make sense. Maybe I should read into that a little bit more. And if that's something that I can convince somebody to do at the end of the day, I think that's a victory.
That's probably too much to ask in general. If someone tells me something like that odd piece of Calvinism there, I will point out what doesn't make sense to me and say, please help me, please explain that. If that can't be done, then please explain why it makes sense to you, and just listen carefully for logical fallacies or unbased assertions again, and then make that known to them. I think the best you can do is expect them to stop and recognize, and sometimes just go, I hadn't thought of that, or something along those lines. They're not going to change their mind up front. But if you can pull that off, then you've made probably a reasonable bit of progress.
I think that's ultimately what my goal is, because I mean, at the end of the day, as a queer person myself, like a lot of the reasons why I'm so, I wouldn't call myself maybe an anti-theist, but the why I'm so, diametrically opposed to just the existence of religion and how it informs people's decision-making processes in society, especially American society. It's really frustrating to just have to constantly justify my existence.
Yeah, and that's now you took it to another level there, because it's one thing if they believe something peculiar. It doesn't have to be Calvinism, but anything peculiar, flat Earth or whatever. But it's another thing where their practice of it causes harm on you, causes discrimination, causes you to feel bad because, well, I don't know about feel bad, because it's not their responsibility that you feel bad unless they're doing something extremely aggressive. Or trying to pass laws against minorities and things like that. So that's the best I can do for you. I'm sorry. If I knew more about Calvinism, maybe we'd have a better answer. But
I really appreciate your time. Do you mind if I hang out and just kind of listen in the live, or would you prefer I drop down to the chat?
I do not. I just brought up, was it Life for You?
For Yeshua. Saltish, Yeshua.
Yeshua. What's his life for you? What's the last word that's cut off there?
It says life for Yeshua.
Oh, okay. It's just truncates.
Yeah. So, Salty's Chips, you had a problem with free will with the omniscient God. I can answer this.
Go ahead.
So you suppose, since God is omniscient, that he can foretell events, and that therefore free will cannot exist. Is that your objection? Salty's Chip?
My specific thought process on it is, in the Bible it states that God knows you before you will ever even be born. He knows you at creation. So therefore he knows your path in life. He knows the path that you're going to take, which would mean, logically, that he would have known that at some point in my life I was going to become an apostate. He would also know what it would take for me to continue to worship, to continue to be a believer, and yet he does not continue or has done anything to show me the proof that I'm looking for. And he knows what that proof would take from me, but he has refused to give that to me. So
I thought your objection was free will.
That more or less has to do just with my opinion on theology. But because of that, I don't think so. When you it might take a little bit more of an explanation than just yes or no. But the way that I look at it is, if God created me knowing that I was going to become an apostate, that is not an act of my free will. He knew that it was going to happen. And he created the conditions for it to happen. There was no act of free will on my choice for that to happen. He already knew that was going to happen. So that isn't free will.
Yeah, so here's my objection. This is a common misunderstanding. This is why actually Calvinism exists, but so with that logic, you actually suppose that God is foretelling events. But God is outside of space and time. So every single event in human history is happening in the now for him. It is currently happening for him. There's no foreseen events because he's outside of space and time. Everything happens in the now. Therefore, you can have free will with God's omniscience.
Well, then that would disprove omniscience, because he would not be omniscient to know the future.
No, he does know the future, but he's not foretelling the future.
He's omniscient.
No, he can't foretell the future because he's experienced the future. He's experienced the future right now.
How do you know?
Because he's outside of space and time.
Life. We can look at the space-time that we are currently in as one four-dimensional entity where past and future all exist, and you've seen that on the analogy like slices of moments. So that's kind of the same thing. But I'm puzzled also by the statement that God is outside of space and time, which it just seems like a blatant assertion. What do you base that on?
If God is in space and time, he is finite. That would not make him God. God, in definition, has to be outside of space and time.
How do you know he exists at all then?
Well, we can see him providentially in the world, right?
Define providentially.
So how do you know? What is your justification that logic works in your materialistic worldview?
That doesn't matter, because whatever restrictions.
No, this is how we understand this problem.
Whatever restrictions I have, you have the same ones. So that doesn't matter. That's not true.
Because we understand his problems.
You answer the question? How can you justify God existing out of space and time? That's not just an assertion.
Well, the definition of God is a purely omniscient being, right? And definitions like that. Therefore, if he's existing within a finite reality, then he's not God.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't have spoken over you. Say that again. I won't speak over you.
So you say, how do I know God is out of space and time? It's because that's the only way God could even exist, right? If God is in space and time, he's actually a finite being. So that's the only possibilities that he's outside of space and time.
How do you know he exists? He could not exist, and that would be equivalent. Yeah. You can't define him into existence.
Right.
Just like I can't define unicorns into existence.
Mm-hmm. So without God in a worldview, the justification for the transcendentals, such as logic, the self, and truth, actually cannot exist and have no justification.
Okay, wait a second. Without God in a worldview is a collection of belief positions. So let's just talk objectively here, not subjectively.
We're kind of starting to go towards the brain in a vat theory here, where you're talking about your justification for existence and how you can prove that you're not a brain in a vat. But I would ask, how does God know that he's not a brain in the vat and that he has not succumbed to perfect delusion?
I wouldn't even go there, because I would ask, how do you know he exists? I mean, then we can ask about parameters of what he is and how we believe what those parameters are. You seem to be laying down an assumption that he exists right from square one.
Right. So my argument is that in any worldview, you actually have to assert things that aren't like have no metaphysical justification, such as things as logic, which is just as absurd as asserting God is real. So therefore, now I'm
So
going to ask the
do
question:
you
what is your
not
justification for logic?
do you not use logic?
No, the only way logic can exist is through the Christian
Do
paradigm.
you use logic?
Yes.
Okay. So do I. We both do. Okay. That does not justify belief. That does not justify the existence or the non-existence of God. We both use it.
Right, but can you
That's a fault.
justify
That's a
logic
faulty
working?
question.
Can
We
you
don't
justify
have
logic
to
working?
justify it. We don't have to.
That's
We
a bold,
meaning
absurd saying.
you and I. Well, I'll rephrase it. You and I are under the same restrictions. We can either we justify it or we don't justify it. We're still using it. So don't put it on me when it also applies to you. This is
No,
the problem I have with this concept.
that's my question. How can logic exist in a materialistic worldview? What is the justification for it?
Are you saying again? Take away the
In your
worldview
worldview,
concept.
how in the
Dude,
atheist paradigm, how is logic
you're
possible?
not listening. You didn't hear a word of
You're
what I
not
just.
answering. You're just saying logic works because logic works.
I'm saying you and I are under the same condition. That's what you're missing. You and I are under
Yes,
the same restriction. And you
okay.
saying that it works for you because you believe in a God and it doesn't work for me because I don't believe in a God makes absolutely no sense. It's a non sequitur.
No, it's not that it doesn't work for you. I'm saying, are you an atheist?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How do you justify logic in your worldview?
Because it works.
That's a circular definition.
Epistemology.
Saying logic works because logic works is actually a
Through
circular definition.
epistemology. Through epistemology.
Through epistemology. That's like saying through science. Like
Okay,
you're not giving a
you don't know what
justification. You're
epistemology
listing.
is.
I
So
know
you don't know
exactly
what
what
epistemology
epistemology
is.
is.
Well,
I know
you
epistemology.
just applied it to science. You don't know what
No,
epistemology is if you
oh my gosh.
direct
Can
it
you listen
loosely
to
to
me?
science.
I know
Epistemology
what
is the philosophical study of logic
I
and
know
how we
Kant.
can apply
Yes.
logic to things.
I know Kant and I know Hume, bro. I've read these philosophers. I understand what epistemology is. What I'm asking is, what is your epistemic justification for logic in an atheistic worldview?
And the reason I'm not answering that is because
It's because of mine.
you are implying that it is a condition that applies to the atheist side and not to the other side, which is not true.
Are you using logic right now?
Dude, we're both using logic.
That's my,
Are you thinking and
yes.
speaking right now?
I'm not saying logic doesn't exist. I am simply saying, what is your justification for logic?
That's the root of this toy that you're doing. That you're putting a justification that it doesn't need to be there. Okay? It's either justified for both of us or it's not. You are not in a different condition than I am. You have the same brain. We're in the same reality. Logic is like a language of understanding relationships, how we understand that the relationships are correct. It's a language to explain those relationships. You and I are doing the same thing. So I don't have to justify it. That's as far as I can go to justify it, because I don't know logic in more detail on that. But you're doing the same thing. It doesn't just apply to me. So explain to me how you believe that you have to ask me that question while I can't ask you that question.
Well, you can ask me that question. I have a justification for it. You don't.
What's your justification?
So the only possible justification is that a transcendental being providentially is justifying the logic.
Stop. I'll let you restart. Don't tell me the only one, okay?
It's the only way.
Tell me how it makes sense to you.
A transcendental being, aka God, providentially can justify is a reflection of God, is the justification of logic. And
How do you know?
That.
Okay, fair enough. How do you know a transcendental God exists?
How do I know what?
How do you know that a transcendental God exists?
because that's the only way there can be justification for things like logic, the self, and truth.
Then you've just discovered the problem with your argument, because you don't need friggin' justification, dude. You can just do the damn logic. So there goes your
But then
justification.
it falls apart in your worldview. If there's no justification for logic in a physical worldview.
Dude, you've been sold a book of goods here. You don't need some sort of special justification. It still works. Take away the damn justification. Hypothesize that God doesn't exist and go ahead and do A plus B equals C.
Why does it work?
It doesn't matter.
It works because it works. Every single definition of logic and its justification that you give is a circular definition, which is just contradictory at a paradigm level. That's the problem with the materialistic worldview.
Wow, you're just repeating yourself. You don't understand. Why don't you understand this? This is not complicated.
I'm understanding it. You're just not answering the question.
Do you see what I mean by these people have to use like metaphysics to try to explain epistemological understandings as opposed to the other way around? That's what I said that's what I meant when I said that earlier.
Yeah. What I see is that I see an imposition, an attempted imposition, to put a requirement on the atheist side and saying that you don't need it on the theist side.
No, we have it on the theist side. I gave it to you.
That's what pisses me off.
I gave you.
And you're wrong.
No, because the argument. All right, let me take it bare bones. X is the necessary condition of Y. Y, therefore X. That is the transcendental argument summed up. It is a perfectly logically coherent argument. You just don't have any justification for logic. You're just asserting that it works because it works.
Slow down.
That's a causational argument.
Say it again slower.
X is the necessary condition for Y. Y, therefore X. God is the necessary condition for logic. Logic, therefore God.
Okay. X is the necessary condition for Y. Let's start with that, right? First off, that's an assertion. You have to prove it previously. So we can go with if X is a necessary condition for Y.
Well,
right? Are you good with that?
If you have no justification for logic, logic cannot be therefore possible.
Are you good with that? You're the one who brought up the logic. You're the one using this logic. If X is a necessary condition for Y, did you see? Okay, let me rephrase it. I'll just stick with what you said. X is a necessary condition for Y, right? That's yes. Your first premise? Okay. You understand that for a proposition to be, for a conclusion of an argument to be true, the propositions have to be true, right? So just to say that X is a necessary condition for Y is not a proven statement. You have to develop a previous argument that generates that truth. So go back.
Yeah, and my argument is no other worldview can provide.
Give me an argument that ends with X is the necessary condition of Y. So we know that that's true, because maybe it's true that X is not the necessary condition for Y. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay. In a materialistic atheistic worldview, there is no Y cannot be conditioned on anything.
Why are you playing whataboutism games? We're asking you specifically about how you presuppose that X, being God, equals Y equaling logic. You're using a causational argument. You're trying to say X equals Y, therefore Y and X are the same thing. That doesn't make sense. That's a causational argument.
That's not my argument.
That's not how logic works.
That's not my argument.
That is literally your argument, and I really think that you don't understand how logic works if that's what you think.
Because
he's in there. He's got an extra piece that he doesn't need. Go ahead.
No. Right, because anything replaced for X doesn't work besides God.
X is a necessary condition for Y. So God is a necessary condition for
logic. We can use that example.
For unicorns.
No, Y is specifically the transcendental, such as logic, the self, time and space relations, and things like that.
How did you rule out the variables in this equation?
because there's no other because any other worldview cannot actually support the condition of Y.
Okay, but your worldview should be your worldview doesn't have to be contingent on other worldviews. It should be self-evident.
So you're telling
It
me
is
your logic
self-evident
has
because Y is
special
able
rules.
to
Okay,
provide
so
an
if
X.
it's self-evident, then how did you rule out all of the other variables?
What do you mean? How did I rule out non-theistic or non-theist?
The other
How did
options,
you rule them out?
Because
it may not be the precondition for Y. How did you rule that?
logic has no epistemic justification in a purely materialistic worldview.
So you cannot speak. You cannot make a coherent argument. If
My
we hear
argument
logic,
is since logic works, God exists. I'm asking you, since
that's a
God doesn't exist
that
in
is
your
a non
worldview.
sequitur. That is a non sequitur. Those are
You don't
those are
understand what a
concepts that do not link. Those concepts do not link. You have to make them link with argument. You have to justify the link. You can't just say that they link. And you can't
So-
say that because I don't believe it, they don't link. Because my belief does not change, my disbelief does not change reality.
I have another question.
I'm not saying it changes reality.
Nor does your belief create reality.
I'm saying your reality, your idea of your reality can exist. Not that your reality doesn't exist. The idea that you have in your head of your reality can exist.
So
You
if
think
God
your worldview
exists
can exist.
if God exists outside of time and space, how does he affect things within our material reality?
Because creation is a reflection of God's providence.
That's not an answer to the question. How does
I
he
just
affect?
answered.
That is not you gave me a presupposition as to how it does, but you didn't justify the presupposition.
Yeah.
I just told you because it's a reflection of his character, therefore he can
That's
be
a
able
But
to.
he exists outside of
That's a
space and
statement.
time. He exists outside of our space and time.
But
We have no possible way of interacting with him, and therefore, logically, he should have no way of interacting with us because he exists outside of our space and time. How do you come to the conclusion that he is able to affect material reality when he exists outside of it? And I don't want to hear a presupposition of, well, because a story in the Bible says that creation happened and it was a providence under God, therefore it exists. I want to know how. What are the examples, the material examples of how a being outside of our material existence is able to affect material existence?
Okay.
Because he can create things, right?
How do you know
Can he
that?
create things?
Do you know that?
Because the definition of God, it has to be a creator.
The human material definition of God.
Definitions don't create things.
You're asking how.
You
Do
see
you
the
guys know
problem?
Kant or Hume? No, because you guys don't. You guys, I guess, for the past 300 years, you guys haven't looked at any philosophy, right? You don't know what the transcendental argument is. You have no idea what it is. You're just asserting
Transcendental
things.
argument disproves God.
The transcendental argument has been disproven multiple times.
The only way you could disprove it is epistemic nihilism, which I assume you're not an epistemic nihilist.
I mean, there are definitely atheists that do subscribe to nihilistic worldviews. I feel like that's again kind of a
specifically
whataboutism. We're not talking about nihilism. We're talking about this specific example of a being outside of space and time affecting material reality.
He can affect material reality because he creates material reality.
Okay, so how do we know that he can create material reality if he's outside of space and time?
Because, like I said, we have transcendentals within our reality that can only be predicated on God.
Such as?
The self, logic, space and time relations.
No.
So how did you rule out the variables that the self, the ego, all of these things are something that we came to as a conclusion through philosophy and our way of determining the self?
Sorry, say that again?
So my worldview and the way that I look at philosophy on the self, on the ego, on how we kind of look at what consciousness is we look at it philosophically. We look at it how it's the question of how do I prove myself? How do I prove my own existence? Right? Was that
Yeah.
something that we can agree on? Okay.
Or consciousness.
Yeah, our consciousness. So what I'm asking is, how is that? How did you rule out that that was not a human construction? That it was not something created within our own minds?
Because it's a metaphysical thing.
What does that mean? What does metaphysical mean to you?
It doesn't exist within the material world. It's an abstract thing.
How do you know something that exists outside of the material world if you don't have access outside of the material realm?
That's the whole point. Our consciousness proves that very statement.
So if that was the case, then you could not.
Then you couldn't know. Even if God did exist, it could know, but you can't.
If that's
so
the case, you can't disprove the jar in a vat question.
It's not a jar
Sorry,
in a vat.
brain in a jar. Sorry, I said that wrong. If that's the case, then you would have zero way of proving the brain in a jar question.
Well, I could, though.
Okay, go ahead. Prove to us that you're not a brain in a jar that is experiencing everything on your own within your own mind.
Because even if I was a brain in a jar, there's no way my brain can materially comprehend things such as logic and the self and things like this. Because those are actually not material. Sorry?
How do you know you're not succumbing to perfect illusion?
Because I can. Because the logic is coherent and it works.
But that's how the perfect delusion works, right? It's like, we got him. He doesn't think that he's a brain in a jar. We got him.
Well, that's not get. Let's just not be gleeful on getting. I'm trying to be.
No, I'm not saying I got him. I'm saying that's how perfect delusion works. You're a brain in a jar. And every time you say, "Well, I know I'm not a brain in a jar," you're succumbing to perfect delusion.
Yeah.
How do you know that that's not the case?
How do you know God isn't the case?
No. Don't answer a question with a question. Answer the question.
I can't 100% prove it, but I don't need to.
So
I don't
you
even need to 100% prove
so
it.
therefore God exists?
No, I'm just saying, yeah, that could be true.
Okay, so you're filling in the gap of your lack of knowledge.
Yeah, I'm saying that could be true, but that doesn't give any credence to your worldview.
But why does that presuppose a God exists?
Why does what presuppose God exist?
Why does you not being able to confirm that presuppose that God exists?
Well, I mean, if that scenario was true, then God wouldn't exist.
Are you willing to consider that a possibility?
Yeah, but it would be completely abstract. It's just like
it's using the exact same logic that you are when you presuppose that a God exists. It is the exact same logical conclusion that you are using to come to a God existing. It is the exact same.
Yeah. So what I would just ask you is what is your justification for the logic that you just used to prove that to me?
We're gonna stop there, guys. Because now we're just going in circles.
Yeah. So I happy you don't answer my question.
I have a question for you, Life, sorry. So,
yep.
What do you think? It just occurs to me. Let's just buy your argument for a second, and we'll try to work in your head a little bit. What do you think atheists are as sentient beings? Do you think what do you think we are?
You're just beings who haven't come to the rational idea of God yet.
So I grew up a Christian.
Okay. So, wait. No. So let me just play with this.
All right. Sorry. I'll shut up.
Okay. So if we don't believe in God, so what do you think we do? What is wrong with that? What's the problem with that?
Yeah, because what's wrong with that is since you don't believe in God, in your specific worldview, you don't have epistemic justification for logic.
Okay, so what can't I do now?
No, you can do anything because God does exist. I'm just saying in your worldview, in your head, You think that God doesn't exist, but I'm saying that's a
So it,
contradictory
so
idea.
it doesn't, so it doesn't matter then. If my beliefs are wrong and my beliefs do not generate reality, what does it matter if I'm wrong on that particular belief?
Well, you would just face, since you live in unrepented sin, you would just face hellfire.
Okay, so that's it?
Yeah.
Nothing else in this life. I can be just as, I can like tomatoes and I can be kind to people and everything else.
Yeah, of course. You would just have a contradictory world.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be kind. Let's call it there. I'm sorry we couldn't come to a better agreement, but I'm going to drop you guys both just so we can move on to some other people, okay? Because
Fair enough. Appreciate your time.
So appreciate you both, and I'm sure we'll have this conversation again. All right, let me bring in somebody else. I see Vio up here. Oops, I want that accept.
Do you want me to leave too?
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'm gonna flip over because there were like 4 people in the back.
Okay, sounds good.
So call me back another time.
Yeah, sounds good.
Thank you, sir. You've got Vio. Can you hear me?
Yes. How you doing tonight?
Pretty good. A little frustrated with that last one.
I know I missed it. What was the frustration coming from? What happened?
The idea that you need God to have logic, that logic must preclude a God, or that it even proves it, which is circular. But
I understand. Yeah, that can be frustrating. Circular arguments are usually inconclusive and
yeah,
not fun to go around in circles. So
I don't mind giving it a try, because ultimately I also then want to understand how the person believes what they believe. And when it comes down to just making assertions, which is what presuppositions are, ultimately, it's frustrating to not be able to get that across to the other person. So because they're so boxed in with what they've been taught, or Kant or Hume, or whichever, I forget which one came up with it. Anyways, let's move on. What's on your mind?
okay. So I am a theist, and I have this belief that God is accessing infinite dimensions related to mathematics, physics. It's grounded in objectivity to the best of my argument. My argument's coming from an author named Hugh Ross, who wrote a book back in the 90s or 80s.
Hugh Ross, for anybody else out there, is he Christian or is he intelligent design? How would you categorize him?
I would categorize him as Christian. He was a PhD in like mathematics with an undergraduate in astronomy, and this was back in the rise of quantum mechanics back in the 70s that he was studying this stuff. And
quantum mechanics comes from like 1910, but that's fair enough. He was studying it.
Yeah, well, it kind of blew up with Witten in the 70s with string theory, and he was a part of that. He worked, I believe, at UCLA or Caltech or something for postdoc, and then he had a kind of a 180 turn where he joined like a seminary school and devout himself to the Catholic faith.
Yeah, he is, like I was saying, he is. I know he's an intelligent design proponent. He's one of the major things. He's got a podcast, I think, called Reasons to Believe, if I'm not mistaken there.
No kidding. So you know of him?
Yes, I do.
That's super cool. Okay, so I haven't gotten to have this conversation really with anyone, and it's something that's on my mind, is the fact that he proclaims God is, extra dimensional, operates through all of the dimensions, and therefore we have such limited access because we operate in 4 with understanding of the necessity for 10 more in order for the mathematics of standard model to work.
Okay, you're mixing concepts here a little bit, because the 11 dimensions I think that you're referring to, that comes from string theory, right? Which we don't know that it is correct or not. It's still I call it a low hypothesis. Although obviously there's a lot of math behind it.
And the math is valid, I believe.
Well, you and I are not qualified to say that, but we know there are good scientists that have put whole careers into this.
Right.
So it is valid in that sense, but it is a field that has not come to the level of experiment yet.
I agree.
And they don't know if they can. So I think we have to be careful with saying that such hypotheses are probably true.
Okay, but
We just don't know. So we can talk about it as a hypothesis. So but let's talk about the let's go back to your definition of God.
And I'm piggybacking Hugh Ross's here. I'm trying to just get a counter argument to Hugh Ross's that I've never gotten to have from anyone else before.
I don't know his stuff that well, other than the reasons to believe and the intelligent design arguments, the argument from complexity and stuff like that. So give me it one more time. Verbalize that.
No, I'll do my best here. And I just finished his book Beyond the Cosmos, so his whole premise is the extra dimensionality exists, and God operates outside of the 4 dimensions we perceive.
Okay, that's enough. We can work with that.
Okay, cool.
Because, again, we don't know that extra dimensions exist, so it is a hypothesis. So if you say that God is not in space and in space-time, right, is not in the 4 dimensions that we are traditionally comfortable with or familiar with, because this is where we exist and evolved in.
And may I interject real quick? I'm sorry. Let's also say let's go a step further and say God is independent of space-time.
I was just about to go there, because that's also something we don't know.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
Because it kind of goes to what the last guy was saying. And I'll take away the 7 dimensions, okay, for a moment. Let's just say there's natural, which is the 4, and then there's other, which is elsewhere. And let's just say that.
Just say there's something unknown, because we were trying to build standard model and understand it.
The standard model is within our 4 dimensions. It's not in string theory. So string theory is it's something that tries to derive down to the standard model.
Yep, you got it.
Let me see if this makes sense, because when I think of the supernatural, if such a thing exists, I think of it outside of our 4 dimensions.
Me too.
However, so I just call it a realm outside our 4 dimensions, or outside the natural world, same thing. Hypothetically, something over there could interact with R4. Possibly also option 2, maybe it can't.
Right.
And another one is that maybe it could, but we have no way to realize it. Like, it could interact, but it can't make anything that we could see. It can't affect it can't affect matter or whatever. Maybe it can affect dark matter, but it can't affect matter. Who knows? These are all sort of hypothetical unknowns,
right?
But they're all options. So I don't know that if something exists in a supernatural realm, it can't interact with us. However, similarly, I can't say that I am confident that it does, because I don't have enough reason of it. All I have is the concept. All I have is the hypothesis. And the hypothesis is it's not even based on math, it's just based on thought. Perhaps Hugh Ross has a mathematical basis for what he's saying. It sounds like he doesn't, because if he's coming right out and saying there are 11 dimensions, he's basing it on string theory, which is not shown to be true yet, and it may or may not. So his confident assertion that this is the most likely thing is overreach. We'll call it that. So
the golden question, then the golden question is the $1 million question, right? Is where does the classical emerge from? If not quantized strings, then some other unknown.
Well, we can't answer that because we don't know.
Right. And if we were, then I think it would help with our search for, what do we call it? Not God, perhaps, but our search for extra supernatural, as you said, yes.
If supernatural exists, first we have to. It's like asking the why question. You can't ask why this, why that, because first you have to ask, is the answer to the why yes? So first you have to prove that supernatural exists, the other dimensions exist, or whatever you call it, realm, and then we can start to hypothesize on what its attributes are and how we could tell and how we could prove it, or because if it exists and we have no way to access it, no way to measure it in any sense, then we are stuck in a philosophical maze, if you will, that we can never get outside of. And we can do this philosophy. I mean, we can have these interesting thought experiments or thought back and forth, and look for inconsistencies in the logic of it. Because it's all we really have to work with if we don't have physical evidence is logic and math. Right. That's all we have to work with.
And the extent of our observational evidence is coming from places like CERN or the James Webb.
Yeah. I mean, there is no complete blind faith. We all base it on something.
Like there's the observational, in my opinion, the best concrete evidence we have for. Something unknown is present that's influencing the structure of classical is coming from CERN, right, or James Webb.
Well, that's assuming that those are the things that the particles, for example, that the CERN super collider can discover are the ones doing the supernatural influence.
Properties of them,
which may not be true. It may be that that nothing can cross that border. So perhaps we'll find it from CERN. If we find it from CERN, then it's not supernatural anymore. Then it's just science. Then it's just part of the natural world that we are now aware of.
Yes. I see that.
Like just this morning, I saw a post that said, I think it was CERN, that they had created some neutrinos. Now, we've seen neutrinos before, but they're really difficult to find and to
measure
because they don't interact with matter well, right? They can pass right through the whole planet,
right?
With like a very low probability of interacting with anything that then leads to a detection on the detector.
And what if we come to this understanding through observational evidence via experiments that those neutrinos are handcrafted in a sense that they're individually placed by by some unknown force that's emergent from maybe the fundamentals of the universe, that still wouldn't necessarily explain an omnipotent, a God. That wouldn't.
It doesn't mean it comes from a God. It does not mean it comes from a sentient being. It could be a natural phenomena of a multiverse or whatever.
Right.
There's lots of coulds. All these different hypotheses are coulds.
Okay.
And we are stuck in the 21st century where we are in terms of knowledge that we have, which I don't have a problem with.
Same. What about inference to the best explanation, using the simplest explanation to describe the...
Well, inference to the best explanation, I mean, there's a couple ways to look at this. There's the oh God, Occam's razor, right? It's the inference to the simplest explanation. Occam's razor does not mean that the simplest explanation is true. It means that we prefer to have explanations which have a minimal amount of variables because we don't want to have, because when we have more and more variables, there's like more opportunities to be wrong about a piece of that.
Right.
So therefore, we might be making incorrect judgments. So
Makes sense.
it reminds me of the Pirates of the Caribbean, where God, Barbosa says, it's more of a, what does he say? It's more of a rule.
Oh yeah, than a rule. He's like it's more of a guideline than a rule.
Guideline than a rule.
Yeah,
So
that's
it's
so good.
I think of Occam's razor as that. It's more of a guideline. Okay. So you got to be careful. You got to be careful how you use it. It's a valuable thing to consider. Make sure we're not, when we do research in medicine, we want to make sure there are variables that are not variables that we haven't accounted for, like age or sex or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a valuable thing to go with inference to use inference to the simplest explanation, but it's not an absolute. We have to be careful
It's
not to
certainly
use
not
it
foolproof, right?
as an absolute. Now the other one, which is inference to the basically process of elimination. I think
Deductive and
what's his name? Stephen, the other guy in intelligent design. I can't think of his name. He tries to make this argument too, that if there are 5 explanations and you prove 4 of them is wrong, it means the last one is right. And of course, that's not true because
still flawed, right? Because there could be a 6th unaccounted for.
Yeah, there could be more
Makes sense.
I'll simplify that down to 3. Okay, there's 4. Okay, there's the God explanation. Stephen Meyer, that's who it is. He's trying to make the argument for the God explanation, and if I get to it, I'll tell you why. Then there's some other explanation, like evolution, that he thinks is incorrect, and he always makes his arguments against evolution. Then there's always another one, because we can always come up with another one, even by just, farting out words, right?
Yes.
Unicorns make universes, something like that.
I feel
something better.
That's
and then,
the thing.
And then there's always unknowns. So the way I see it, even from just the 3, we've already got a minority because we've got another explanation or an unknown, and then there's the explanation that
it feels almost as if there's infinite explanations to be said.
You're right. I wouldn't. To be fair, I wouldn't go that far because that's unreasonable. I mean, because that includes stuff like
unicorns made the universe, right?
Yeah, so we would want to be more practical about that. So,
yeah.
I mean,
Good conversation though. This was good.
I'm trying. I don't have a problem people coming up with different ideas and hypotheses. I have a problem with their confidence. Unjustified confidence in a particular one when that's not justified. And let me throw out what I was thinking about Stephen Meyer. If anybody doesn't know him, he wrote the book Signature in the Cell, which starts out as a wonderful book. It's the first 100 pages or so is a really good description of evolution, and then it completely falls apart because his goal is to just try to disprove evolution. Look up the Wedge document. It's a document that basically got out, and I want to say Hugh Ross was involved in that, but I'm not entirely sure. I think maybe Hugh Ross was the generation after, so I want to be careful and not force label him for something he wasn't responsible for, even though he took on intelligent design later as a task. The attempt to push creationism. Push intelligent design was sort of like a marketing version of creationism. They were trying to say that, well, we're not saying God, we're just saying an intelligent creator who made the universe.
Rebranding, huh?
It's a rebranding, and it's intentional. Look up the Wedge document PDF.
Okay.
And read that. And it's an internal document where they're talking about the politics of how they were going to push this in the schools and push out evolution. and they got caught. They got caught.
That's interesting. I'll read that.
Yeah, it's not long. It's like 2 pages. The wedge document.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, anything else?
No, I think this was informative and pleasurable.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I enjoyed it too. Anytime we can talk and listen, that's a great interaction. I appreciate you.
Thank you. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening.
You too.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. I wish they were all like that. These conversations. I'm going to send out a whole bunch more invites. Let's see. Oh, there's like 4 or 5 right there. See if anybody else wants to come up. I feel like I'm speaking fast tonight, which is unusual for me. I don't mind. Well, unless it makes it hard for you guys to follow. Because my brain usually doesn't work this fast. But for some reason, I got in a zone tonight, so. Alrighty, I'm going to go back and just look at some of the, see if I can pull some questions out here. There's some good conversation going, but a lot of it's back and forth. You know, people having a conversation rather than just being a question I can jump in on. I was just banned from a Christian life for saying I'm Jewish. Oh, how terrible. Okay, this is an interesting statement. I will state my personal belief as fact because that's what Christians do. That's problematic because, I mean, and we can say the same thing. You could say the same thing about me, but I don't do that. You know, I will not state my personal beliefs as fact because that's what atheists do in this sense. My personal beliefs are, all of them, up for modification if better logic and more information comes out. And to the degree that I am talking about a field that I am not an expert in, like particle physics, I will defer to the consensus of those educated in the field. So if you have a personal belief, and because that's what Christians do, number one, you're limiting your thoughts. You're limiting the amount of information that you'll take in and consider. And you're acknowledging that essentially you may be wrong and you'll never know it because you're asserting what you already know is fact. Somebody a couple of weeks ago said something similar. It's like I said, it was like, you know, where do you want me to start my argument or something? Grossly paraphrasing here. And then he basically did it from the Christian point of view when I was trying to get him to understand that he had assertions in unjustified assertions. So the basis for him moving beyond that was not there. And that's the problem of stating the personal belief as fact. And that's why when you talk to somebody like me, well, whatever. When you talk to me, this is just my thing. Atheists they're not all the same. They have different ways of approaching. You come up to me and say, I believe this is a fact. And it seems, you know, I'll go to the flat earth example because it's a more extreme thing that makes the point. Someone says, is my personal belief that the earth is flat, and that's where I'm going to start and move forward from it. Essentially, you are a solipsist, right? You can't be changed, or maybe you could, but you don't want to be because you're saying you do it as a Christian. You're choosing to do it as a Christian. So you're putting yourself in a box where you state your beliefs as fact. State your beliefs and tell other people why you believe them, why you believe what you believe. And then we'll have a conversation about whether or not it's true. If you're right and you can convince us, then we will adopt your belief. If it's not incoherent with other concepts or inconsistent with logic or whatever. So please try not to, I advise you to not restrict yourself as just talking about what you want, what you already believe as a Christian, because I guarantee you, you're missing out. It's a much, much bigger world than Christianity and what was in the Bible 2,000 years ago. This is the era of science. DV777 says to somebody, we were talking about a creator, forget religion. Don't have the exact context, but that is a valid point. When you're talking about using the transcendental arguments, like the universe exists, therefore God kind of thing, you're not talking God. You're talking about a creator. As the explanation to how the universe came to be, what initiated the Big Bang, for example, a creator. The problem with that is the creator, that's all you get. The creator doesn't even have to be sentient. It doesn't have to be aware of us. Doesn't have to care about us. It could be an interdimensional alien. It could be a natural process of a multiverse, like black holes popping out new universes or whatever. So the tag argument just doesn't get you very far. It just gets you a hypothesis. And most theists that I've spoken to have not heard that before. Well, I shouldn't say that because I was watching some Atheist Experience stuff from a number of years back, and I did mention that. Rational mind doesn't come from non-rational mind. Mind seems to be an emergent process that comes from a brain that can do, calculations and things. So current day knowledge, we still don't know exactly what consciousness is, but the consensus is that it is an emergent property of physical neurons and cells and the matter that derives from, particles, etc. And of course, we are rational now because we're sitting here reasoning and having arguments. So to say it doesn't come from a non-rational mind, you don't know that. I mean, it seems to all evidence is that it came from inorganic matter originally, and then just got more and more elaborate over a long evolutionary history. Who created order for math and science? This is another one of those presuppositional concepts that until you can demonstrate otherwise, and I wish I had 5 years to go study human Kant, but they're not perfect people, and a lot of their ideas have been debunked. So try not to hold them higher than is justified. As with anything, when there's expertise, you need to go with the consensus of the field, not just individual highly knowledgeable experts, even people like Hawking or Einstein. The idea that you need order for math and science, that had to be created, again, is a non sequitur. Math works because math represents the reality we're in, the best that we're aware of. And science is basically a methodology of obtaining what is most likely true, given what we know, and it's a set of knowledge derived from that methodology. So they are what they are. You get math, you get logic, which, like I say, is language, and you get the basic laws of physics, and everything comes from that. So you want a fair question, ask, why does the universe have the basic laws that it has? That's a fair question. And the answer is we don't know. Check back to see. Oh, thanks for all the hearts. Okay, nobody's come up, so I must send out more invites. Doom. Oops. Cancel. No. I hit that by mistake. I'll hit it again. All right, so there goes another 4 invites. Let me get back to the questions. Oh, someone's come out.
Hello. Hey, how's it going, man?
Pretty good. I'm in my cave.
Awesome.
Cavern. What's up?
Yeah, I guess I'm. I would say I'm a bit of a skeptic, and I'm just like struggling to understand. Like, I'm vaguely familiar with like the transcendental arguments and things like that, and I think for me it brings up some questions that I don't have answers to, and I don't really see how the atheist position or even the Christian position answers those questions. Like, I don't know if you can shed any light on that.
Well, what statements are you questioning? What you want to look at the transcendental argument again?
Sure. Yeah. I just joined a few minutes ago, so I didn't see if you had gone over it before or anything.
I don't have these things memorized, so I always have to look it up. Okay.
I mean, I think it's basically just like, even just something like logic as an example, the laws of logic.
Yeah. Let me just get this on my phone real quick.
Sure.
Okay, transcendental argument in philosophy is a form of argument that is supposed to proceed from a fact to the necessary conditions of its possibility. It is a form of deduction with the pattern Q is true only if P is true. And then the assertion is Q is true, the conclusion is therefore P is true. So, yeah, as far as logic goes, again, to me, this looks completely like playing tricks. Mm-hmm. We're all in the same reality. I'm quite sure. We're all working with the same type of brain, and we're all using math and thinking and logic to some degree that we have any training or not. And that's it. There's no, God must exist because of.
I just struggle because it's like I would question how do we know that? How do we know that we exist? Like I'm as a skeptic, I have to take
it down to Descartes, right? Mm-hmm. I think, therefore I am. So you're aware that you're thinking, therefore you know you exist. Good enough.
Yeah, but I think that's what's in question, though. How can you know that?
Because if you weren't thinking, you wouldn't realize that. It doesn't tell you more than that, though. That's the absolute minimum, and I think everybody agrees that Descartes is correct on that piece of it. Our absolute minimum is we know we exist. We don't know what form we are. We don't know that we're not a brain in a vat. We don't know that we're not a simulation or whatever you want to call it. So are you okay with the I think, therefore I am, at least? I don't know that we can go below that. But it's okay if you're not. But let's explore.
Well, I guess thinking would imply there's some form of free will as well.
I think it's just, I think the foundation is just self-awareness. Maybe don't get so hung up.
Right, but self still implies free will, or at least you're able to interpret yourself and view that experience some form of mind. You know, a machine doesn't know that a machine exists. A machine is programmed.
We don't know that, actually. It's unfortunate. We don't know. I mean, we don't know what human consciousness is, right? Other than we say it appears to be emergent. We don't know, and this is valid to say now in the AI era, as it begins, we don't know at what point a machine will become conscious, if indeed it does. It will pass the Turing test long before we have the ability to learn what consciousness is in us, if we ever do. So this is kind of a basement that we're stuck at, frankly.
Yeah, it just seems kind of circular from my view. Is I don't understand how you can. What is it? I'm questioning what is the thing that's thinking, and what is thinking? Is thinking just simply determined inputs and outputs based on the laws of physics?
I think you would have to get some philosophy students or philosophy professors in here to get into this. But for me, what makes it work is that whatever it is, it's true for all of us. And that's what matters. There's no special sauce or special additional rule in a theist's mind versus an atheist's mind. Whatever it is, even if we don't know it in some sort of sense that the way you're describing it, we're all stuck with that. What bothers me is that they'll come out and say that the theist cannot justify his logic, therefore God exists because they can justify their logic, which is bunk. We're both stuck at the point that you're stuck at, right? Or maybe some people would be perfectly fine accepting I think therefore I am. If you want to go below that, I don't have an answer for you. I don't. Doesn't mean there isn't an answer. Doesn't mean there is. It's again one of those don't know realms. But don't try to give yourself a special privilege and special pleading on your set of people. That's where I see presuppositionalism. Because presuppositionalism is not an old thing. It's only like 100 some years old. So it doesn't. And I know they take it back to Kant and other people, but at least at its origin. But it just seems like a ploy to me.
Yeah, I guess I just struggle on where to draw the line with my skepticism, I guess. I can't find a way to, besides just arbitrarily deciding well, we just are, so I'll just take that as a brute fact or something.
Well, you don't have to. You can go further, but take it to a philosophy group.
Yeah. I was just curious if you
take it to a philosophy stream.
You had mentioned
I can't go beyond that, below that.
Sure.
Right? But as long as you're comfortable with the idea that whatever it is, it applies to all of us.
Sure.
I'm 100% on.
So how would you justify your atheistic beliefs then?
I have trouble with the word justify, the way it's presented by theists, but I will answer the question because it's a fair question. I don't have an atheist belief because I've been striving to be an atheist or come to that position. It is a conclusion reached upon evaluating the question, is there a God, given all the evidence I have available to me that I've been able to access in my lifetime, right? Time and restrictions and stuff like that. So it appears, and of course you learn more by listening to other people and reading what you can of scholars and things. It seems quite obvious to me that objectively there is not enough reason and or evidence to justify any supernatural beliefs. So the default is I'm not aware that a God exists. It's not a God doesn't exist position. It is I can't say that it does. So the justification and looking at the arc of history and what science has learned over time is that all these things that we used to think had supernatural origins, all the way to, like, diseases caused by demons and things like that, have come one at a time, over and over and over again, shown to be naturalistically explained. So the God explanation sort of like drops off. We don't need Thor to explain thunder once we know how weather works, kind of a thing. So if you come up with an explanation for or a justification for your belief in God or an element of God, then let's have that conversation, and we'll see if it appears that your reason is justified. I know something about belief in general. I've studied how people come to beliefs. There's a lot of intuitive basis to it. There's a lot of belief by desire. There's a lot of rationalization of what they've already been taught. Some people just don't like to be wrong, so they will never change their mind because they just like put their foot down and stay on what they've always believed. So there's basically cognitive biases come into the discussion.